The howling wind rattled Warren Pierce's cabin windows as he stoked his fire against the bitter Alaskan night. That's when he heard it, a sound different from the wind's wail, a scratching at his door, followed by a low, mournful whine. Heart pounding, Warren peered through the frosty glass and froze. 2 gray wolves stood on his porch, their once proud bodies trembling, ribs visible beneath matted fur. Their eyes met his, not with the fierce gleam of predators, but with a desperate, pleading gaze that chilled him more than the sub-zero air. One wolf pawed weakly at the door, leaving streaks of red in the snow. Against every survival instinct, Warren found his hand on the doorknob. "This is madness," he whispered to himself. "No man in his right mind would invite wild wolves into his home." Yet as their eyes locked again, Warren understood with sudden clarity. This decision would forever alter the course of his life. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Warren Pierce had called the remote Alaskan wilderness home for 3 decades, longer than he'd lived anywhere else. His log cabin, weathered but sturdy, stood alone on 5 acres bordering national forest land, 20 miles from the nearest small town of Pinewood. At 58, Warren's face was etched with lines that told stories of harsh winters and summer hunts. Framed by a salt and pepper beard he'd trimmed just enough to keep it from becoming white. 5 years ago the cabin had housed 2. Sarah, his wife of 27 years, had filled these rooms with warmth that defied the cruel Alaskan winters. They'd built this life together, far from the chaos of cities where they'd both grown up. But Sarah was gone now, lost to a winter accident when their truck skidded off an icy road into Eagle River. Warren had survived. Sarah hadn't. The search and rescue team found him clutching her body, nearly frozen himself, whispering her name over and over like a broken prayer. Since then, solitude had been both his comfort and his prison. He spoke to few people, made monthly trips to Pinewood for supplies, and otherwise kept to himself and his routines, chopping wood, maintaining his greenhouse where he grew hardy vegetables, hunting, and reading dog-eared paperbacks by firelight. The locals respected his grief by giving him distance, though occasionally someone would drop by with moose stew or sourdough bread, leaving it on his porch with a gentle knock. Warren's understanding of wolves went back to his childhood in Montana, where his father, a forest ranger, had taught him to respect all wildlife. "Everything has its place," his father would say, "even the creatures men fear." At 12, Warren had witnessed hunters illegally shooting a wolf pack, an image that haunted him still, the magnificent alpha male falling mid-stride, blood-staining pristine snow. His father's quiet fury afterward shaped Warren's view of the natural order. Now, in the depths of one of the harshest winters he'd experienced, Warren's supplies were carefully rationed. He had enough to last until spring thaw, but only if he was careful. The temperature had not risen above 0 in weeks, and game was scarce. Warren understood survival in these conditions better than most, knew the fine line between life and death when the mercury plunged and daylight lasted just a few precious hours. What he couldn't know was how that knowledge would soon be tested in ways he never imagined. The evening had begun like countless others in Warren's solitary existence. He'd spent hours splitting logs behind his cabin, the rhythmic chunk of his axe echoing through the snow-laden pines. His breath formed thick clouds in the frigid air as he stacked the fresh-cut wood on the porch, enough to keep his hearth blazing through the night. The temperature was dropping fast as the weak winter sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the snow in hues of lavender and deep blue. Inside, Warren had heated a simple stew, venison from last fall's hunt, root vegetables from his greenhouse. He settled by the fire with a steaming bowl and a worn copy of Jack London's White Fang, finding irony in reading about wolves on this particular night. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows with increasing ferocity. Warren added another log to the fire, grateful for his snug shelter against nature's fury. It was just past 9 when the first scratching came at his door, barely audible above the howling wind. Warren paused, spoon halfway to his mouth, ears straining. There it came again. A deliberate, desperate sound, followed by a whimper that raised the hair on his neck. Living in the wilderness, Warren had learned to distinguish between the sounds of various creatures. This wasn't a bear or a moose, creatures known to occasionally wander near human dwellings. Setting his bowl aside, Warren grabbed his rifle, a precaution ingrained by years of wilderness living. He approached the window cautiously, using the barrel to push aside the curtain a few inches. What he saw made him lower the gun immediately. 2 wolves stood huddled on his porch, their bodies pressed together against the cutting wind. Even in the dim porch light, Warren could see they were in terrible condition. Their ribs protruded beneath dull, matted fur. One leaned heavily against the other, favoring its right hind leg where dark blood had frozen in clumps. They were young adults, not quite in their prime, with the lankier build of wolves who hadn't eaten well in weeks. Warren's heart hammered in his chest. Any sane person would shore up the doors, perhaps fire a warning shot to scare them off. Wolves were not dogs. They were apex predators, capable of bringing down animals 10 times their weight. Yet these wolves showed no aggression. The larger one raised its head, amber eyes meeting Warren's with an intelligence that seemed to communicate across the species barrier. It whined again, pawing gently at the door. "This isn't happening," Warren muttered to himself. Yet he found himself setting the rifle aside. His hand trembled slightly as he turned the deadbolt. Every wilderness instinct screamed against what he was doing. He opened the door just a crack, cold air rushing in, bringing the scent of pine, snow, and wild animal. The wolves remained still, shivering violently, the injured one letting out a soft whimper that sounded eerily like a plea. "You're out of your mind, old man," Warren whispered to himself. Yet as he looked into those eyes again, a strange recognition stirred in his memory. Had he seen these wolves before? Taking a deep breath, Warren opened the door wider. "If you're coming in, now's the time," he said gruffly, as if they could understand. To his amazement, the wolves exchanged what could only be described as a glance before the larger one carefully helped its injured companion limp across the threshold. Once inside, they stopped, not venturing further, their bodies still tense. Warren closed the door against the howling storm, the soft click of the latch sealing his fate with theirs. In that moment, as man and wolves regarded each other in the fire-lit cabin, Warren couldn't possibly know how this simple act of compassion would upend his carefully isolated existence and force him to confront both his past and his future. Warren awoke before dawn, his body stiff from sleeping upright in his armchair. He hadn't dared retreat to his bedroom, unwilling to turn his back on the wild predators now sharing his living space. The wolves were where he'd left them, curled together near the hearth on the old blanket he'd laid out, their breaths forming a synchronized rhythm. The fire had died to embers, and the cabin had cooled considerably. As Warren stirred to add more wood to the fire, the larger wolf's head shot up, eyes instantly alert. Their gazes locked, and Warren froze, suddenly aware of his vulnerability. But the wolf made no threatening move, merely watching as Warren slowly reached for a log and placed it on the glowing coals. Only when he settled back in his chair did the wolf lower its head again, though its eyes remained fixed on him. In the strengthening firelight, Warren could better assess the injured wolf's condition. What he saw troubled him deeply. The leg wound was worse than he'd initially thought. A deep gash running the length of the thigh, the edges puffy and inflamed. The animal's breathing seemed labored, and a fine tremor ran through its body despite the cabin's warmth. "You need help more than just food and shelter," Warren murmured, running a hand over his beard. He'd treated injured wildlife before, a wounded hawk once, and a fox kit abandoned by its mother, but never something as dangerous as a wolf. The injured wolf's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his voice, and in the amber depths Warren saw something that sent a jolt of recognition through him. There was a distinctive white marking around the animal's right eye, shaped like a crescent moon. Suddenly, Warren was transported back 3 winters ago to the worst blizzard he'd experienced since Sarah's death. He'd been checking his trap line miles from home when the storm hit with unexpected ferocity. Disoriented in the whiteout conditions, Warren had stumbled into a ravine, breaking his snowshoe and twisting his ankle. Certain he would freeze to death, he'd huddled against a rock face as darkness fell. That's when they appeared, a pack of gray wolves, materializing like ghosts in the swirling snow. Rather than attacking, they had circled him curiously. A young wolf with a crescent marking round its eye had approached closest, sniffing at him before rejoining the others. The pack had moved on, but oddly their tracks led in a clear direction through the storm. Desperate, Warren had followed, finding himself, miraculously, within a mile of his cabin. "It's you, isn't it?" Warren whispered, leaning forward. The wolf's ears twitched but gave no other sign of recognition. Warren's contemplation was interrupted by a harsh knock at his door. He glanced at his watch. Barely 7 in the morning. No one came calling this early, especially not in weather like this. The wolves tensed, the larger one positioning itself protectively over its injured sibling. Grabbing his rifle, Warren approached the door cautiously. "Who's there?" "It's Mike Townsend, Warren. Open up." Warren grimaced. Mike was the local game warden, a decent enough fellow, but a stickler for regulations. He cracked the door just enough to see Mike's frost-reddened face, but positioned himself to block any view into the cabin. "What brings you out in this cold, Mike?" Mike stamped his feet, trying to keep warm. "Got a report that there's wolf tracks leading right to your door, Warren. Tommy Sullivan was checking his trap lines yesterday and said he followed them here. You know anything about that?" Warren's mind raced. Tommy Sullivan was a notorious wolf hater whose ranch had lost 3 calves to predators last month. "Can't say I've noticed any wolves," Warren replied, the lie bitter on his tongue. Mike studied him for a moment. "Warren, harboring endangered wildlife without proper authorization is against state and federal law. If you've got wolves in there—" "I know the law, Mike," Warren cut him off sharply. "I've been in these woods longer than you've been alive. Now, if you don't mind, I've got breakfast cooking." After a tense moment, Mike nodded reluctantly. "Fair enough, but this isn't the end of it. The Ranchers Association is up in arms about wolf attacks. They are organizing a hunt, legal or not." He lowered his voice. "You'd be wise to stay clear of this one, Warren." After Mike left, Warren leaned against the closed door, heart pounding. The injured wolf's condition was deteriorating by the hour. Without proper veterinary care, it might not survive another day. Yet seeking help meant exposing the wolves to danger from people like Tommy Sullivan and his trigger-happy friends. As if sensing his dilemma, the larger wolf approached him cautiously, standing just out of reach. Its intelligent eyes seemed to convey both trust and uncertainty, mirroring Warren's own conflict. In that moment, Warren made his decision, one that would set him against his neighbors and force him to break his self-imposed isolation. The phone call was brief and guarded. Warren hadn't used his satellite phone in months, and the battery protested as he punched in the number for Pine Ridge Wildlife Research Center, some 50 miles north. He'd remembered reading about their wolf monitoring program in the local paper, a controversial project that had drawn both praise from conservationists and ire from ranchers. "I need someone who knows wolves," was all he said when a woman answered. "Got a situation. Can't explain over the phone." He gave his coordinates and hung up before she could ask too many questions. While waiting, Warren attended to his unexpected guests. The healthy wolf accepted water from a bowl but remained wary, growling softly when Warren approached its injured companion. With slow, deliberate movements, Warren managed to place a fresh bowl of water within reach of the injured wolf. It lapped weakly, its eyes glazed with pain. "Don't you die on me now," Warren muttered. He'd already risked too much. By mid-afternoon, Warren heard the distinctive whine of a snowmobile approaching. The wolves heard it too, the larger one immediately on alert, hackles raised. Warren placed himself between them and the door, speaking in low, soothing tones, as he'd been doing since their arrival. "Easy now. This might be help coming." Through the window, he watched a figure in a bright blue parka dismount from the snowmobile and trudge through knee-deep snow toward his cabin. Not bothering to knock, Warren opened the door when she reached the porch. "Dr. Williams?" he asked, recognizing her from a newspaper photograph. The woman nodded, pulling down her scarf to reveal a youthful face weathered by outdoor work. Her dark hair was braided tightly against her head, and sharp brown eyes assessed Warren with clinical precision. "Kara Williams," she confirmed. "You called about wolves?" Warren hesitated, still blocking the doorway. "How do I know I can trust you?" Kara's expression softened slightly. "You don't. But that injured wolf you're hiding, and don't bother denying it, I can smell him from here. Probably doesn't have much time without proper care." Reluctantly, Warren stepped aside. Kara entered, stopping abruptly when she spotted the wolves. The larger one stood protectively over its companion, teeth bared in a silent snarl. "My God," she whispered, slowly removing her gloves. "These two went missing from our study, packed 3 weeks ago. We thought they were dead." She knelt, keeping a respectful distance, and studied them with the practiced eye of a researcher. "Brother and sister, about 3 years old. The female's injured, obviously." She glanced up at Warren. "How did they end up here?" Warren explained finding them at his door the previous night, omitting his suspicion about the female being the same wolf from his blizzard encounter. Some things were too personal, too strange to share with a stranger. "They were desperate," he finished. "Wouldn't have survived another night out there." Kara nodded, setting down her pack and removing a first aid kit far more sophisticated than Warren's meager supplies. "You did the right thing, Mr. Pierce." Warren, then," she smiled briefly. "I'll need to sedate her to properly clean and treat that wound. It's infected, but I've seen worse." For the next hour, Warren assisted as Kara worked on the injured wolf. The males circled restlessly, occasionally growling but never attacking. Kara spoke soothingly to both animals as she cleaned the wound, injected antibiotics, and applied a proper bandage. "She's lucky," Kara said finally, packing away her supplies. "Another day without treatment and we'd be looking at sepsis. Now she has a fighting chance." Warren felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "What happens now? You take them back to your center?" Kara shook her head, surprising him. Moving her in this condition would be risky. The stress alone could kill her. They need to stay put for at least a few days, let the antibiotics do their work. She studied Warren's face. "That is, if you're willing to continue hosting them." Before Warren could respond, a mechanical rumble disturbed the quiet. Through the window he spotted 3 snowmobiles approaching fast, kicking up plumes of powder. "Damn it," he muttered. "Trouble." Kara joined him at the window, her body tensing. "Tommy Sullivan," she identified the lead rider, "and the Larson brothers. They've been agitating against our program for months." Warren grabbed his rifle, checking that it was loaded. "They've been agitating against wolves a lot longer than that." The snowmobile stopped in a semicircle before his cabin. The lead rider, a bulky man in a red and black plaid hunting jacket, dismounted and strode toward the door, not bothering to remove his helmet. His companions flanked him, both carrying rifles. Warren opened the door before they could knock, stepping onto the porch and closing the door firmly behind him. "That's far enough, Tommy," he called. Tommy Sullivan removed his helmet, revealing a ruddy face framed by a dark beard streaked with gray. His eyes, hard as river stones, fixed on Warren. "Mike Townsend says you're harboring wolves, Pierce," Tommy's voice carried in the cold air. "Wolves that likely killed 3 of my calves last month." Warren kept his rifle pointed downward but ready. "Mike Townsend talks too much. What I've got in my cabin is my business." Tommy's gaze flicked to Kara's snowmobile, then back to Warren. "That's a Pine Ridge research machine. You got that Wolflover Williams in there, too." He raised his voice. "You best come out, Dr. Williams. We know what you're up to." Inside, Warren could hear the wolves growing restless, the male's growls audible even through the door. Kara stepped out, joining Warren on the porch, her chin lifted defiantly. "Mr. Sullivan," she acknowledged coolly, "I'm treating injured wildlife, which is perfectly legal under my permit." Tommy spat into the snow. "Those permits don't cover private property, and they sure as hell don't cover wolves that've been killing livestock." "You don't know it was these wolves," Kara countered. "Wolf's a wolf," said one of the Larson brothers, raising his rifle slightly. "Only good one's a dead one." Warren stepped forward, his patience evaporating. "You're trespassing, all three of you. I never gave permission for you to be on my land." "Land's only yours because the state lets you keep it," Tommy retorted. "And the state says harboring dangerous predators is illegal." "So is forming a lynch mob," Warren replied evenly. "Now, turn those machines around and go home before this gets ugly." For a tense moment, no one moved. Warren could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong. He'd faced down grizzlies and survived blizzards. 3 angry men didn't intimidate him. Finally, Tommy jerked his head at his companions. "This isn't over, Pierce. Those wolves have killed, and they'll kill again. Next time it might be someone's kid instead of a calf." "Get off my property," Warren repeated, raising his rifle slightly. The men retreated to their snowmobiles, engines roaring to life with unnecessary force. Tommy pointed 2 fingers at his eyes, then at Warren. "I'm watching you," before speeding away, snow billowing in his wake. When they disappeared beyond the tree line, Warren's shoulders sagged. "That's going to be a problem." Kara nodded grimly. "Tommy's been pushing for a renewed wolf hunt for months. He's got half the county convinced wolves are decimating livestock, despite our data showing they account for less than 2% of losses." She looked at Warren curiously. "I didn't expect you to side with the wolves." Warren turned to go back inside. "I don't take sides. I just don't like bullies, human or animal." As evening approached, Kara and Warren settled into an uneasy alliance. She shared her knowledge about wolf behavior, explaining how the pair were likely siblings from last year's litter. "There should be a third," she mentioned, studying her notes. Tracking data showed 3 young adults moving together, separated from the main pack during a territorial dispute. "We lost their signals during that big storm 3 weeks back." Warren's interest piqued. "A third wolf? Out there? Alone?" Kara nodded, concern etching her features. "They are extremely social animals. Being separated from packmates is tremendously stressful. If the third is still alive, it's probably desperate to find these 2. The idea of another wolf wandering alone, possibly injured in the bitter cold, settled uncomfortably in Warren's chest. He moved to the window, staring out at the darkening forest. Somewhere out there, a lone wolf was fighting for survival, unaware its siblings were just a few miles away. "We have to find it," he said finally. Kara looked up, surprised. "We? I thought you just wanted these 2 gone as soon as possible." Warren didn't answer immediately. The truth was, he wasn't sure what he wanted anymore. For 5 years, he'd cultivated solitude like a garden, tending his grief and isolation until they grew thick as weeds, choking out all else. Now, in the span of 24 hours, his carefully constructed bubble had been pierced, first by the wolves, then by Kara, even by Tommy Sullivan's threats. "They came to me for help," he said eventually. "Seems wrong to help these 2 and leave the third to die." Kara studied him, her expression softening. "The weather's supposed to clear tomorrow. If the female is stable, we could take the snowmobiles and search the area where we last had a signal." Warren nodded, surprising himself with his eagerness to help. "I know these wolves better than anyone. If that wolf's out there, we'll find it." That night, Warren insisted Kara take his bed while he slept on the couch near the wolves. The larger one, the male, whom Kara had identified as the dominant sibling, watched Warren with unblinking eyes as he settled under a blanket. "You know where your brother or sister is, don't you?" Warren murmured. "Wish you could tell us." The wolf's ears twitched, and it stretched out beside its sleeping sister, never taking its eyes off Warren. Sleep came fitfully to Warren. Dreams of Sarah intermingled with images of wolves running through snow, their breath clouding in the moonlight. In one vivid sequence, he was lost again in that blizzard from 3 years ago, but this time Sarah was with him, pointing toward the wolves that would lead them home. He awoke before dawn, disoriented and sweating despite the chill. The cabin was quiet except for the soft breathing of the wolves and the occasional pop from the dying fire. Warren added more wood, then put on coffee, his mind still tangled in the strange dreamscape. Kara emerged as sunrise painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of rose and gold. They ate a simple breakfast of oatmeal and dried fruit, discussing their plan for the day. The female wolf seemed stronger this morning, accepting small pieces of meat from Kara's hand, her eyes clearer. "He's responding well to the antibiotics," Kara noted, relief evident in her voice. "The infection's receding." Their planning was interrupted by the distant sound of engines, multiple engines growing louder by the second. Warren hastened to the window, cursing under his breath. Sullivan's back, and he's brought reinforcements. 5 snowmobiles approached in formation, Tommy Sullivan in the lead. Behind him rode Mike Townsend, the game warden, and 3 other men Warren recognized as local ranchers. "They've got rifles," he noted grimly. Kara joined him at the window, her face pale. "This isn't legal. They can't just hunt wolves without permits, especially not ones under research protection." "You think they care about legal at this point?" Warren checked his own rifle, though the thought of using it against fellow humans sickened him. "Best case, they've got Townsend convinced these wolves are the ones killing livestock and got him to authorize removal." "And worst case?" Kara asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "Worst case, they've decided to take matters into their own hands, law be damned." The snowmobiles formed a wider semicircle this time, effectively blocking any escape route from the cabin. Tommy dismounted first, followed by the others. Mike Townsend approached the porch, his official uniform a stark contrast to the hunting gear worn by the others. "Warren Pierce," he called. "By authority of the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, I'm ordering you to surrender any wolves currently on your property. They're suspected in multiple livestock deaths and pose a danger to the community." Warren exchanged a glance with Kara, whose face had hardened into determined lines. The wolves sensed the tension, the male moving protectively in front of his injured sister, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Stay here," Warren told Kara. "Keep them calm if you can." Stepping onto the porch, rifle held loosely but visibly at his side, Warren faced the assembled men. This was no longer about just 2 injured wolves. This was about standing ground against fear and hatred, about protecting the helpless, something he had failed to do for Sarah when it mattered most. "Mike," he acknowledged the game warden, ignoring the others, "let's talk about this reasonably." Behind him, inside the cabin, the male wolf's growl grew louder, as if sensing the threat gathering at Warren's door, a threat that would force Warren to choose sides in a conflict that had been brewing in these mountains long before any of them were born. Warren stood on his porch, feet planted firmly against the weathered wood, facing the assembled men. The morning air bit at his exposed skin, but he barely noticed the cold. His attention was fixed on Mike Townsend, whose official stance was undermined by the nervous shifting of his weight from one foot to the other. "You know this isn't right, Mike," Warren said, keeping his voice level. "Official removal requires documentation, proper permits, and humane transport. Not a posse with rifles on a Sunday morning." Mike had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I've got documentation of 3 livestock deaths in the past month, Warren. DNA evidence confirms wolf predation." "DNA evidence doesn't tell you which wolves," Warren countered. "These 2 have been injured and struggling to survive. They didn't kill anybody's livestock." Tommy Sullivan stepped forward, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "We don't need to prove which specific wolf did the killing, Pierce. State law allows for removal of predators threatening livestock or human safety. And since when are you the state, Tommy? Warren's gaze swept over the armed men. "This looks more like a lynch mob than a legal operation." Tommy's face reddened. "We've followed the proper channels. Townsend's here, ain't he? Now step aside. Those wolves are coming with us, one way or another." Behind Warren, the cabin door opened and Kara stepped out. She'd put on her parka but hadn't zipped it, suggesting her haste to join the confrontation. "These wolves are part of a federally funded research program," she stated, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "They are wearing tracking collars registered with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Killing them would violate multiple state and federal statutes." One of the ranchers, Bill Larson, spat into the snow. "Convenient how those collars didn't work when the wolves were killing our cattle." "Collars malfunction, especially in extreme weather," Kara replied calmly, "but that doesn't change their protected status." The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for what happened next. From within the cabin came a series of fierce growls, followed by the sound of something heavy falling. Warren's heart sank. The male wolf had been growing increasingly agitated by the voices and scents of strangers. Tommy raised his rifle instinctively. "Hear that? Those animals are dangerous and they're in distress. That's grounds enough for immediate removal." Warren made a split-second decision. "Mike, you and I both know this isn't procedure. Give me 48 hours to work with Dr. Williams to relocate these wolves properly. They're injured and need medical care, not bullets." Mike hesitated, his eyes flicking between Warren, Kara, and the increasingly impatient ranchers. Before he could respond, a howl rose from the distant forest. Long, mournful, and unmistakably wolf. Everyone froze, heads turning toward the sound. "That'll be the third one," Tommy said grimly, "coming to join its pack." Kara stepped closer to Warren, lowering her voice. "That could be the sibling we were talking about, if it finds its way here while these men are outside." Warren nodded, understanding the implications. A wolf approaching a group of armed, scared men wouldn't stand a chance, and if shooting started, it wouldn't stop with just the newcomer. "Mike," Warren appealed again, urgency sharpening his tone, "you know me. 30 years I've lived here without causing trouble. I'm asking for 2 days to handle this humanely." The game warden rubbed his bearded chin, conflict evident in his features. Finally he sighed. 2 days, Warren, not a minute more, and those wolves stay contained on your property." Tommy's protest was immediate and colorful. "You're making a mistake, Townsend. Those wolves are killers." "I've made my decision," Mike replied, a new firmness in his voice. "This isn't how we do things, Tommy. Not in this county. Not while I'm warden." The ranchers grumbled, but Mike's authority, however reluctantly exercised, held sway. They retreated to their snowmobiles, Tommy being the last to mount, his hard stare promising this wasn't the end. As the sounds of their engines faded, Kara released a breath she'd been holding. "That buys us some time, but not much." Warren was already turning back to the cabin. "Did you hear that howl?" "Yes," Kara said, following him inside. "It was close, within a couple of miles." "And did you notice how our wolves reacted?" Indeed, both wolves were now alert, the male pacing anxiously while the female had managed to raise herself to a sitting position, ears pricked forward. When the howl came again, closer this time, both wolves tilted their heads back, though neither howled in response. "They know who it is," Warren said softly. "Their missing sibling." Kara nodded, already pulling gear from her backpack. "We need to find it before Sullivan and his friends do. The weather's clear enough for a search, but we'll need to move fast." "What about these two?" Warren gestured to the wolves in his living room. "The female can't be moved yet, and we can't leave her alone," Kara replied, thinking aloud. "One of us needs to stay with her." Warren considered the situation. "You stay. You know better how to monitor her condition. I'll take my snowmobile and track the howls." Kara looked skeptical. "Alone? That wolf will be scared, possibly aggressive, without tranquilizers or proper equipment." "I know these woods," Warren interrupted, and that wolf out there is desperate to find its family. Somehow it tracked them here. I might not be a wildlife expert, but I understand something about that kind of desperation." After a brief argument, Kara relented, providing Warren with some basic tranquilizers and instructions on their use. "Don't try to be a hero," she warned as he zipped up his heavy winter coat. "If the wolf is aggressive or too frightened to approach, just track its location and come back. We'll figure out another way." Warren nodded, though they both knew he wouldn't leave a suffering animal out in the cold if he could help it. The male wolf watched intently as Warren gathered supplies: rope, blankets, first aid kit, the tranquilizers from Kara, and some raw meat from his freezer. It was almost as if the animal understood what he was planning. "Keep them safe," Warren told Kara as he headed for the door, "and yourself." Outside, the day had brightened considerably, sunlight gleaming off the pristine snow. Warren fired up his old snowmobile, the engine's rumble disturbing the forest's quiet. He paused, listening for another howl to guide him, but heard nothing. Undeterred, he headed in the direction of the last call, keeping his speed moderate to avoid missing any signs of the wolf. The forest was a winter wonderland, branches heavy with snow, sunlight filtering through in dappled patterns. Under different circumstances, Warren might have appreciated the beauty. Now his focus was singular: find the missing wolf before Sullivan and his men regrouped and decided to ignore Mike's deadline. A mile from his cabin, Warren spotted the first signs: wolf tracks cutting across a clearing headed roughly toward his property. The tracks looked fresh, the edges still sharp in the powdery snow. The wolf was on the move, trying to reach its siblings. Warren followed the trail deeper into the forest, where the snow-laden branches formed a cathedral-like canopy overhead. The tracks led to a frozen creek, then seemed to disappear. Warren killed the engine, listening. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of branches shifting in the light breeze. Then he heard it, a soft whimper, barely audible. Warren turned slowly, scanning the underbrush. There, partially concealed beneath a fallen log, he caught a glimpse of gray fur. "Easy," he murmured, though the wolf was too far away to hear him. Carefully he dismounted, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The tranquilizer gun Kara had provided was in his pocket, but Warren hesitated to use it. Drugging a frightened animal in these temperatures carried its own risks. Instead, he reached for the package of raw meat, unwrapping it and placing a piece on the snow. Then he retreated several steps and waited. Minutes passed. Warren remained motionless, his breath clouding before him. Finally, the underbrush stirred and a wolf emerged cautiously. It was thinner than its siblings, ribs clearly visible beneath its dull coat. One ear was torn, and it moved with a slight limp, favoring its left front paw. Its eyes, however, were alert and intelligent, fixed on Warren with wary assessment. It sniffed the air, catching the scent of the meat, and took a hesitant step forward. "That's it," Warren encouraged softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The wolf startled at his voice, but didn't flee. Its gaze shifted between Warren and the meat, hunger warring with caution. Eventually hunger won. It approached the offering, still watching Warren, and quickly devoured the meat. Warren slowly placed another piece on the snow, a bit closer to himself. The wolf hesitated longer this time, but eventually came forward to take it. With each piece, Warren shortened the distance between them, speaking in low, soothing tones all the while. Whether it was the wolf's desperation or some inherent recognition, perhaps it remembered Warren from that long-ago blizzard as well, the animal allowed him to approach within arm's length. Up close, Warren could see the wolf was male, younger than the other two, likely from the same litter but born a bit later. "Your family's waiting," Warren told him, offering the last piece of meat directly from his gloved hand. The wolf sniffed cautiously, then took the offering with surprising gentleness. As it ate, Warren slowly reached for the loop of rope he'd fashioned into a makeshift lead. One quick movement and he might be able to secure the wolf long enough to get it onto the snowmobile. The sound of distant engines shattered the moment. The wolf's head shot up, ears flattened against its skull. Warren cursed under his breath. Sullivan and his friends had apparently decided not to wait for Mike's deadline. The wolf bolted, disappearing into the underbrush. Warren called after it futilely, then rushed back to his snowmobile. The engines were growing louder, at least 3 machines, approaching fast. Warren had to lead them away from both his cabin and the fleeing wolf. Starting his engine, he deliberately headed away from both locations, leaving clear tracks in the virgin snow. If Sullivan wanted to chase someone, let it be him, not a defenseless animal. The ruse worked. As Warren crested a small rise, he spotted 3 snowmobiles altering course to follow his tracks. Tommy Sullivan was in the lead, rifle slung across his back. Warren gunned his engine, staying just far enough ahead to keep them following, but not so far that they'd give up the chase. He led them on a winding route through the forest, away from the path the wolf had taken, buying time for the animal to escape and for Kara to prepare for possible confrontation at the cabin. Warren knew these woods intimately, every hidden gully, every fallen log. The others were forced to follow his trail, unable to predict where the aging trapper was leading them. The chase might have continued indefinitely, if not for what happened next. Rounding a sharp bend, Warren's snowmobile suddenly sputtered and died. He'd been so focused on the pursuit that he'd failed to notice the fuel gauge dipping into reserve. The old machine rolled to a stop in a small clearing, leaving Warren exposed and vulnerable. Cursing his oversight, Warren quickly grabbed his rifle and moved behind a large pine. The pursuing engines grew louder, then slowed as they spotted his abandoned snowmobile. Tommy was the first to pull up, killing his engine and dismounting with fluid grace that belied his bulk. "Pierce," he called, scanning the trees. "Game's over. Where are those wolves?" Warren remained silent, watching as the other 2 men joined Tommy in the clearing. They spread out, rifles at the ready, peering into the shadowed forest. "We know you're out here, Pierce," Tommy continued. "Mike's deadline doesn't mean squat. Those wolves killed 3 of my prize calves. Blood for blood. That's the law out here." Warren weighed his options. He could stay hidden, hoping they'd eventually give up and leave, but that seemed unlikely given Tommy's determination. He could try to reason with them, but 3 armed, angry men weren't likely to listen to reason. Or he could try to lead them further away, on foot, buying more time for Kara and the wolves. Before he could decide, a twig snapped to his right. All heads turned, rifles raising instinctively. To Warren's horror, the young wolf had followed him, perhaps drawn by familiarity in a forest suddenly full of threatening strangers. The animal froze, caught in the open between the trees and the men. For a suspended moment, no one moved. Then Tommy raised his rifle, taking aim. "No!" Warren shouted, stepping from his hiding place. "Tommy, don't!" The distraction worked. Tommy swung his rifle toward Warren instead, his expression darkening. "You're protecting the very thing that's killing our livelihood, Pierce. What the hell is wrong with you?" Warren kept his own rifle lowered, hands spread in a placating gesture. "That wolf didn't kill your calves, Tommy. It's been struggling to survive, same as all of us out here." "You don't know that," Tommy snapped, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "I do know," a new voice called. Everyone turned to see Kara emerging from the trees, Mike Townsend beside her. She held up a tablet. "We have satellite tracking data for all 3 wolves in this sibling group. For the past month, they've been at least 30 miles from your ranch, Tommy. They physically couldn't have killed your calves." Mike stepped forward, his official presence adding weight to Kara's words. "I've seen the data, Sullivan. These aren't your killers." Tommy's rifle remained pointed at Warren, but his confidence was visibly wavering. "Then what did kill my cattle?" "Something's been picking off stock all across the county." "A rogue male we've been tracking from the northern pack," Kara replied. It's been separated from its family group and hunting alone, taking easier prey like livestock instead of wild game. These 3 wolves are actually territorial rivals of that rogue. The young wolf, sensing the human's distraction, began to slink away toward the denser forest. Tommy noticed and swung his rifle back toward it. "Easy," Mike cautioned, hand on his service weapon. "Those wolves are protected, Tommy. You shoot and I'll have to arrest you. Is that what you want? To leave your ranch and family while you sit in a cell?" For a tense moment, Warren thought Tommy might fire anyway. Then, with a disgusted sound, the rancher lowered his rifle. "This isn't over," he growled, looking between Warren, Kara, and Mike. "When that she-wolf recovers, I want all 3 of them gone from this county. If I lose another calf, I'll hold you personally responsible, Townsend." Mike nodded soberly. "Fair enough. Now, let's all go home before this gets any more complicated." Tommy and his companions retreated to their snowmobiles, the machines roaring to life and quickly disappearing back the way they'd come. Mike lingered, looking uncomfortable. "I need to go with them, make sure they actually leave," he told Warren and Kara. "But this situation is untenable. Those wolves can't stay here long term." "We know," Kara assured him. "Once the female is stable enough to travel, we'll transfer them to the research center." After Mike left, Warren turned to Kara, questions in his eyes. She smiled tiredly. "The male got anxious after you left, started pacing, whining. Then we heard the snowmobiles in the distance, and I knew there might be trouble. I called Mike, convinced him to come out and prevent a tragedy." "And the female?" Warren asked, concern evident in his voice. "Resting comfortably. The antibiotics are working." Kara glanced toward the trees where the young wolf had disappeared. "Did you see him, the 3rd sibling?" Warren nodded, filling her in on his brief connection with the animal. "He's skittish, but desperate for his family. I think he'll follow us back to the cabin." "Then we should go," Kara said, eyeing the darkening sky. "Storm's moving in again, and your snowmobile isn't going anywhere without fuel." As if summoned by their conversation, fat snowflakes began to fall, lazy at first, then with increasing urgency. Warren secured his useless snowmobile as best he could. He'd retrieve it after the weather cleared, and they began the long walk back to the cabin. They hadn't gone far when Warren sensed they were being followed. Glancing back, he caught glimpses of a gray shadow moving parallel to their path, just visible among the trees. The young wolf was trailing them, keeping a cautious distance but clearly unwilling to lose sight of his potential connection to his siblings. "He's coming with us," Warren said softly, indicating the wolf with a subtle nod. Kara smiled, her breath clouding in the increasingly heavy snowfall. "Family instinct, it's powerful." As they trudged through the deepening snow, Warren found himself reflecting on family, the one he'd lost with Sarah, and this strange new one forming around him, comprised of a wildlife researcher and 3 wild wolves who, against all odds, had placed their trust in him. Behind them, the young wolf followed steadily, drawn by bonds stronger than fear. Above, the storm gathered strength, wrapping the forest in a shroud of white, and ahead, the warm lights of Warren's cabin beckoned, a haven for all manner of lost creatures seeking shelter from the cold. The storm closed in with frightening speed. What had begun as gentle snowflakes quickly transformed into a blinding curtain of white, driven horizontally by howling winds. Warren and Kara struggled forward, heads bent against the onslaught, each step an exercise in determination. The temperature plummeted as darkness fell, turning their breath into frozen crystals that clung to their scarves and eyelashes. "We need to move faster," Warren shouted over the wind's roar. "This storm's worse than forecast." Kara nodded, her face barely visible beneath her frost-covered hood. Periodically, she glanced back, searching for signs of the young wolf. It had fallen further behind as the weather deteriorated, now just a fleeting shadow in the swirling snow. "Will he make it?" she called, concern evident even through her shouted words. Warren didn't answer immediately. The truth was, he didn't know. Adult wolves were remarkably resilient creatures, adapted to survive Arctic conditions that would kill a human in hours. But this wolf was weakened by hunger and injury, separated from its pack for weeks. Even nature's most perfect designs had their breaking points. "Let's focus on getting to the cabin," he finally replied. "He's followed us this far. He won't give up now." The statement was as much hope as conviction. As they trudged onward, Warren found himself straining to catch glimpses of the wolf, relief flooding through him whenever that gray form materialized through the storm. Something about this animal had gotten under his skin, bypassing decades of careful emotional barriers. By the time the cabin's outline emerged from the whiteout, both Warren and Kara were stumbling with exhaustion. The final 100 yards felt like miles, each step a supreme effort against wind that seemed determined to push them backward. Warren fumbled with the door latch, fingers numb despite his heavy gloves, finally shouldering it open against a drift of snow that had already accumulated on the porch. Inside, the cabin was concerningly cold. The fire had died down to embers during their absence. More alarming was the scene that greeted them. The female wolf lay sprawled near the hearth, her breathing shallow and rapid, while the male paced frantically, whining with obvious distress. Kara rushed to the female's side, stripping off her gloves to place a hand on the wolf's flank. "She's burning up," she reported, voice tight with concern. "The infection's gotten worse, not better." Warren moved to stoke the fire, adding logs with practiced efficiency. "I thought you said the antibiotics were working." "They were." Kara was already digging through her medical supplies. "Sometimes there's a secondary infection or the bacteria develops resistance. I've seen it before, but rarely this fast." As warmth gradually returned to the cabin, Warren watched Kara work, her movements precise despite her obvious fatigue. She administered another injection, cleaned the wound site again, and placed cool compresses on the wolf's body to bring down the fever. "Will she make it?" Warren asked, the question emerging before he could stop it. Kara didn't look up. "I don't know. Her body's fighting hard, but she's very weak." Outside, the storm raged, rattling the windows with each gust. Warren thought about the young wolf somewhere out there in the maelstrom, separated from the warmth and safety just yards away. Moving to the door, he opened it a crack, peering into the swirling darkness. "He won't come while you're standing there," Kara said gently from behind him. "Too frightened." Warren nodded, closing the door reluctantly. "If he doesn't find shelter." "Wolves are survivors," Kara reminded him, though her tone lacked conviction. "He's made it this far." The night progressed with agonizing slowness. The female wolf's condition deteriorated despite Kara's best efforts, her breathing becoming more labored, her body trembling with fever. The male remained close, occasionally licking his sister's face with heartbreaking tenderness. Near midnight, Warren was startled from a light doze by a change in the cabin's atmosphere. The male wolf had risen, hackles raised, staring intently at the door. A moment later, Warren heard it too, a faint scratching, barely audible above the storm's fury. Exchanging a quick glance with Kara, Warren moved to the door, opening it cautiously. Snow blasted in, temporarily blinding him. When his vision cleared, he saw the young wolf collapsed on his porch, nearly buried in a drift, its coat encrusted with ice. "Jesus," Warren breathed, immediately bending to scoop up the animal. It was frighteningly light in his arms, and didn't resist as he carried it inside, kicking the door shut behind him. The reunion of the three wolves should have been joyous. Instead, it was heartbreaking. The young male, too weak to stand, simply lay where Warren placed him near the fire. The older male approached cautiously, sniffing his brother, then began frantically licking the ice from his fur. The female, lost in her fever, seemed barely aware of the newcomer's presence. Kara quickly examined the young wolf, her expression growing more troubled by the moment. "Severe hypothermia, dehydration, possibly frostbite on the paws," she reported. "We need to warm him gradually and get fluids into him." For the next hour, Warren and Kara worked side by side, fighting to save both ailing wolves. They heated blankets by the fire, prepared warm broth, and administered the medications Kara had brought. The older male watched their efforts with intelligent eyes that seemed to hold both trust and resignation. "I've never seen animals accept human intervention like this," Kara murmured as she checked the female's temperature again. "It's almost as if they know we're trying to help." Warren didn't respond. He was focused on the female, whose breathing had become alarmingly irregular. There was a rattle in her chest that hadn't been there before, and her once bright eyes were glazed and unfocused. "She's getting worse," he said flatly. Kara bit her lip, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "I've given her everything I can. Without a proper veterinary facility, I don't—" She trailed off, unwilling to voice the obvious conclusion. The storm outside reached new heights of fury, the wind's howl becoming almost a living thing. The cabin creaked and groaned under the onslaught, the old logs shifting minutely as they had for decades of Alaskan winters. In another circumstance, Warren might have worried about the roof, or whether his stockpile of wood would last. Now those concerns seemed trivial compared to the life ebbing away before his eyes. Shortly after 2 in the morning, the female wolf went into convulsions. Her body arched, muscles rigid, a terrible keening sound escaping her throat. The male immediately pressed closer, whining anxiously, while the younger brother watched from his place by the fire, too weak to join them. "Hold her," Kara instructed, preparing another injection. "Try to keep her from injuring herself." Warren knelt beside the wolf, placing his hands firmly but gently on her heaving body. He could feel her heart racing beneath his palms, a frantic drumbeat fighting against the inevitable. Her fur was hot to the touch. Her eyes rolled back, showing only whites. "Easy, girl," he murmured, the endearment falling naturally from his lips. "Easy now." The convulsion lasted nearly a minute before the wolf's body finally relaxed, going limp beneath Warren's hands. For one hopeful moment he thought she was simply exhausted. Then he realized her chest had stopped moving entirely. "Kara," he said hoarsely. She was already there, fingers searching for a pulse in the wolf's neck. After several seconds, she sat back on her heels, eyes bright with unshed tears. "She's gone, Warren." The words hung in the air, final and devastating. Warren remained where he was, one hand still resting on the wolf's cooling body. He'd seen death before, had caused it himself as a hunter, and had held Sarah's hand as she slipped away in that hospital bed, yet this loss cut unexpectedly deep, as if something vital had been torn from him. The male wolf nudged his sister with his muzzle, then licked her face when she didn't respond. He repeated the action with increasing urgency, whining softly, then looked up at Warren with eyes that seemed to ask a question no human could answer. "I'm sorry," Warren told him, voice breaking. "We tried." As if understanding, the wolf threw back his head and howled, a sound of such profound grief and loneliness that it brought immediate tears to Warren's eyes. The younger wolf, still weak but conscious, joined in from his place by the fire. Their combined voices filled the cabin, rising and falling in a requiem as ancient as the wilderness itself. Outside, the storm seemed to pause, the wind momentarily stilled as if in respect for their mourning. In that brief silence, Warren was transported back to the moment of Sarah's passing, the sterile hospital room, the flat line on the monitor, his own howl of denial that had brought nurses running. He'd thought himself empty of tears after 5 years, but now they flowed freely, merging with those that slid silently down Kara's cheeks. When the wolves finally fell silent, the cabin seemed unnaturally quiet, despite the renewed assault of the storm. Warren gently stroked the female's cooling fur, remembering how she had appeared on his doorstep just days ago. Desperate but dignified, seeking help from the very species that most often brought death to her kind. "What do we do now?" he asked hollowly. Kara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. In the morning, when the storm breaks, we should bury her. It's what she deserves." Warren nodded, his gaze shifting to the two surviving brothers. The younger one had dragged himself closer to his siblings, his strength gradually returning thanks to the warmth and broth. The older male stood guard over his sister's body, occasionally nosing her fur as if still hoping for a response. "And them?" Warren gestured to the surviving wolves. "They still need us," Kara said simply, "now more than ever." As the night deepened around them and the storm continued its relentless assault on the isolated cabin, Warren found himself in a vigil he hadn't anticipated. Mourning a wild creature he had known for mere days, yet who had somehow worked her way into the closed chambers of his heart. Beside him, 2 wolves and a human stranger shared his grief, a makeshift family bound by loss and the tenuous hope that dawn would bring something other than more sorrow. In that moment, Warren understood that saving these wolves had never really been about the wolves at all. It had been about finding something worth fighting for again, about reconnecting with the world he'd shut out after Sarah's death. That the lesson should come with such a steep price seemed cruelly fitting in a land where nothing came easy, and where life and death performed their ancient dance with merciless indifference to human hopes. Dawn arrived with merciful calm. The storm had blown itself out sometime in the early morning hours, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine drifts and ice-encrusted trees that glittered in the pale sunlight. Inside the cabin, exhaustion had finally claimed both Warren and Kara, who had fallen asleep in their chairs near the fire. The wolves had maintained their vigil beside their fallen sister throughout the night, occasionally whimpering softly but otherwise silent in their grief. Warren awoke first, stiff and disoriented. For a moment, he couldn't remember why he was in his living room chair instead of his bed. Then reality crashed back. The wolves, the chase through the forest, the failed attempt to save the female. He glanced toward the hearth, where the 2 male wolves were curled protectively around their sister's body. The younger one, though still weak, looked markedly better than he had the night before, his eyes clearer and more alert. Kara stirred as Warren added wood to the dying fire. "What time is it?" she asked groggily. "Just after 7, Warren replied, checking his old wristwatch. "Storm's passed." They moved quietly, respecting the somber atmosphere. Warren prepared a simple breakfast of coffee and oatmeal, while Kara examined the younger wolf, who submitted to her gentle prodding with surprising docility. "He's recovering well," she reported, relief evident in her voice. "No sign of frostbite, though he's still dehydrated and malnourished." Warren nodded, grateful for the small mercy. "The roads will be impassable for days after a storm like that. We need to figure out what to do with—" He couldn't finish the sentence, his gaze shifting to the female wolf's still form. "I've been thinking about that," Kara said, accepting the mug of coffee Warren offered. "Normally, I'd take tissue samples back to the research center, but under the circumstances—" She hesitated, studying Warren's face. "I think she should be buried here, where her brothers can visit if they choose." The suggestion touched Warren unexpectedly. He'd assumed Kara would insist on transporting the body for scientific study and had been steeling himself for an argument. Her sensitivity surprised him. "There's a clearing not far from here," he said after a moment. "South-facing slope that catches the sun. Ground will be frozen solid, but I've got tools." The task of burying the wolf proved as difficult as Warren had anticipated. The earth was iron-hard beneath its blanket of snow, unyielding to the pickaxe he wielded with grim determination. Sweat froze on his forehead as he worked, each breath a cloud in the bitter air. Kara helped as best she could, spelling him when his arms grew too tired to continue. The older male wolf had followed them to the clearing, keeping a watchful distance as they dug. The younger one remained at the cabin, still too weak for the journey through deep snow. When the grave was finally ready, a shallow depression in the frozen ground, the best they could manage, Warren returned to the cabin to retrieve the female's body. He'd wrapped her in a clean blanket, carrying her with the same gentle care he might have shown a sleeping child. As he laid her in the grave, the male wolf approached, watching intently. Warren stepped back, allowing the animal to say its goodbye. The wolf sniffed his sister's shrouded form, then threw back his head in one final mournful howl that echoed across the snowy landscape. The sound raised goosebumps on Warren's arms, touching something primal in his soul. When they had covered the grave and marked it with a cairn of stones, the three of them, 2 humans and a wolf, stood in silence, an impromptu funeral for a creature whose death had affected them all more deeply than seemed possible. It was only as they turned to leave that Warren noticed it. A distinctive marking on the male wolf's shoulder, visible now that the animal had turned. A patch of white fur shaped like a crescent moon, almost identical to the one he'd observed on the female. The sight stopped him in his tracks. "Kara," he said quietly, "these wolves. Have you ever seen markings like that before?" She followed his gaze, studying the white crescent. "It's unusual, but not unheard of. Why?" Warren hesitated, suddenly uncertain whether to share what had been, until now, a private memory. Finally, the need to understand overcame his reticence. 3 years ago, I was caught in a blizzard," he began, his voice low. "Got disoriented, fell into a ravine, broke my snowshoe, twisted my ankle. Night was falling, temperature dropping. I knew I was going to die out there." Kara listened intently as Warren described the wolves that had appeared that night. A small pack passing through, curious about the human huddled against the rock face. How they had circled him, sniffed the air around him, then moved on. But not before one young wolf with a crescent marking had approached, closer than the others. "I followed their tracks," Warren concluded. "Don't know why. Desperation, maybe. But they led me straight toward my cabin, saved my life." Kara's expression had transformed from polite interest to astonishment. "You think these are the same wolves, the ones that helped you?" Warren nodded slowly. "Can't be sure about the young one, but this fella," he gestured to the male wolf who was watching them with those intelligent amber eyes, "and his sister. The markings are too similar to be coincidence." Kara's scientist training made her naturally skeptical, but even she couldn't dismiss the possibility entirely. "It would explain their willingness to approach your cabin, their unusual trust in you," she admitted. "Wolves have remarkable memories, especially for scents and places associated with safety." The revelation cast everything in a new light. If Warren was right, he hadn't simply been helping random injured wolves. He had been repaying a debt to the very creatures that had once guided him home. The walk back to the cabin was contemplative, each lost in their own thoughts. The older wolf trotted alongside them, no longer keeping his distance, but still maintaining his wild dignity. It was as if the shared experience of grief had bridged some gap between them, creating a tentative alliance. They were nearly at the cabin when they spotted the vehicles, 2 snowmobiles and a large truck with Caterpillar treads designed for traversing snow-choked roads. The machines were parked haphazardly near Warren's porch, their tracks marring the otherwise pristine snow. "Sullivan," Warren muttered, instinctively reaching for his rifle before remembering he'd left it inside. Kara laid a restraining hand on his arm. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Could be Mike Townsend checking on us after the storm." Warren wasn't convinced, but he forced himself to approach calmly. The wolf, sensing the tension, melted back into the tree line, watching warily. As they neared the cabin, the door opened and 3 figures emerged. Warren recognized Tommy Sullivan immediately, his bulk unmistakable even in winter gear. Beside him stood Mike Townsend and, to Warren's surprise, Dr. James Harper, the veterinarian from Pinewood. "Pierce," Tommy acknowledged gruffly. His expression was uncharacteristically subdued, none of the previous day's aggression evident. Warren stopped a few paces away, conscious of the wolf watching from the forest edge. "Sullivan, this is unexpected." Mike stepped forward, his official demeanor softened by what appeared to be genuine concern. "We were worried when the storm hit. Figured you might be stranded out here with those wolves." "We managed," Warren replied cautiously, unsure where this was heading. Tommy cleared his throat awkwardly. "Brought Doc Harper with us. Thought he might help with that injured wolf." Warren and Kara exchanged surprised glances. "That's unexpected," Kara said finally. Tommy's face reddened beneath his beard. "Look, not saying I've changed my mind about wolves in general, still think they're a menace to livestock, but Mike here showed me the tracking data again this morning." He shifted uncomfortably. "If these particular wolves weren't the ones that killed my calves, well, seems wrong to punish them for something they didn't do." Warren was speechless. Of all the scenarios he'd imagined for this confrontation, Tommy Sullivan having a change of heart hadn't been among them. Dr. Harper, a lean man in his 60s with kind eyes, stepped forward. "Where's the patient?" Kara's expression fell. "We lost the female during the night. Infection was too advanced." The news sobered the group further. Dr. Harper shook his head regretfully. "I'm sorry to hear that. What about the others? Mike mentioned there were 3. "2 males," Warren confirmed. "One inside, still recovering from exposure. The other," he glanced toward the trees where the older wolf had vanished, "is nearby, watching us." Dr. Harper nodded, unsurprised by the wolf's caution. "Let me take a look at the one inside at least." As they moved toward the cabin, Tommy hung back, clearly uncomfortable. Warren, acting on an impulse he didn't fully understand, stopped beside the rancher. "Thank you," he said simply, "for bringing the dove." Tommy shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "My daughter Emily made me see sense," he admitted gruffly. "She's 12, crazy about animals. When I got home yesterday, she was waiting up, all fired up about what she'd heard in town. Said if the wolves didn't kill our calves, they deserved a fair chance." Warren felt a smile tugging at his lips, the first in what felt like days. "Smart girl." "Too smart," Tommy agreed ruefully. "Reminds me of her mother." He hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "She didn't know this, but we lost her older sister 6 years back. Hiking accident in these mountains. Search party found evidence of wolves nearby, and I convinced myself they were responsible somehow. Easier than accepting it was just bad luck and poor decisions." The admission stunned Warren. Everyone in the county knew Tommy Sullivan had lost a daughter, but the circumstances had been kept private. That he would share this now with Warren of all people spoke volumes about the internal struggle the man must be experiencing. "I lost my wife," Warren found himself saying. "Car accident on an icy road. I know something about needing something to blame." The 2 men, adversaries just a day earlier, shared a moment of understanding that transcended words. Then, by mutual unspoken agreement, they moved on toward the cabin, where Dr. Harper was already examining the younger wolf under Kara's watchful eye. Inside, the dynamic had shifted in an unexpected way. The young wolf, though still cautious, allowed Dr. Harper to check him over with remarkably little fuss. Mike Townsend stood nearby, visibly moved by the animal's condition. "He's doing remarkably well considering what he's been through," Dr. Harper announced after completing his examination. "The fluids and nutrition you've been giving him have helped enormously. With continued care, he should make a full recovery." Kara couldn't contain her relief. "That's wonderful news." As if sensing they were discussing him, the wolf gazed around at the assembled humans, his amber eyes lingering on each face before settling on Warren. There was something in that gaze, an intelligence, a depth of understanding that transcended the normal boundaries between species. Dr. Harper noticed it too. Remarkable animal," he murmured. "I've treated injured wildlife for 40 years, and I've never seen a wolf this accepting of human presence." Mike cleared his throat. "So what happens now? Sullivan here has agreed not to press for their removal, but they can't stay in Warren's cabin indefinitely." It was Kara who answered, though her response surprised everyone, including herself. "Actually, I've been reconsidering my approach to these wolves," she said slowly. "My original plan was to transport them to our research facility for study, but after what's happened," she shook her head, "these animals have a connection to this place, to Warren. Separating them might do more harm than good." "What are you suggesting?" Warren asked, uncertain where she was heading. Kara took a deep breath, as if making a decision that went against her training. "I think we should establish a monitoring station here. Let the wolves recover in familiar territory where they have a friend." She glanced at Warren. "If you're willing, of course." The proposal hung in the air, radical and unexpected. Warren looked from Kara to the wolf, to the strange assembly of people in his cabin, the game warden, the veterinarian, and the rancher who had been his enemy just 24 hours earlier. Something fundamental had shifted, not just in their relationships with each other, but in their understanding of the natural world they all shared. Before he could respond, the cabin door creaked open. Everyone turned, startled by the sudden movement. There, standing on the threshold, was the older male wolf. He had circled the cabin while they talked, approaching from the rear, and now stood framed in the doorway, snow dusting his thick fur. His gaze swept the room, taking in the humans and his brother, assessing potential threats with ancient instinct. Then, with deliberate dignity, he stepped inside and walked directly to Warren, sitting at his feet as naturally as if he'd been doing it all his life. The silence that followed was profound, broken only when Dr. Harper whispered, "Well, I'll be damned." In that moment, watching the wild creature that had chosen, against all odds and natural inclinations, to place its trust in him, Warren knew exactly what his answer would be. Spring came slowly to the Alaskan wilderness, as it always did, first in subtle shifts, the lengthening of days, the softening of snow crystals, the occasional drip of meltwater from south-facing eaves. Then in a gradual awakening as patches of earth emerged from beneath their white blanket and the first hardy wildflowers pushed through the thawing soil. By mid-May, the transformation was complete, the landscape reborn in vibrant greens and the varied hues of alpine blooms. Warren stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the sunrise paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and pink. The air held the crisp sweetness that was unique to Alaskan spring mornings, a scent that had once filled him with quiet contentment. Now, it carried a bittersweet edge. Today was the day. A movement at the forest edge caught his attention. The two wolves emerged from the trees, trotting across the cleared area around his cabin with easy confidence. Over the past months, they had become a familiar sight. Not domesticated, never that, but comfortable in their unusual arrangement with the humans who had saved them. The larger wolf, whom Warren had come to think of as Shadow, approached the porch first. His once dull coat now gleamed with health, thick and lustrous in the morning light. The younger one, Echo, followed more cautiously. Though fully recovered from his ordeal, he retained a wariness that his brother had gradually shed. "Morning, boys," Warren greeted them, his voice gruff with the emotion he was trying to suppress. Neither wolf responded, of course, but Shadow's tail gave a single sweep that Warren had learned to interpret as recognition. The screen door creaked behind him as Kara stepped out, her own coffee steaming in the cool air. "They know," she said softly, watching the wolves. "Animals sense these things." Warren nodded, not trusting himself to speak. In the 4 months since that fateful night when the first two wolves had appeared on his doorstep, his life had transformed in ways he could never have anticipated. The isolated existence he'd built since Sarah's death had been irrevocably breached. First by the wolves themselves, then by the expanding circle of humans now involved in what Kara had dubbed the Pinewood Wolf Project. The cabin, once a fortress of solitude, had become a hub of activity. Kara had set up monitoring equipment in what had been Warren's seldom-used guest room. Dr. Harper visited regularly to check on the wolves' health. Even Tommy Sullivan and his daughter Emily had become frequent visitors, the young girl's enthusiasm for the wolves gradually softening her father's lifelong prejudice. Most surprising of all had been the wolves themselves. While never losing their essential wildness, they had adapted to human presence with remarkable flexibility. They came and went freely, sometimes disappearing for days to roam their territory, but always returning to the clearing around Warren's cabin as if checking in. The door opened again, and Dr. Harper joined them, his kind face solemn. "Beautiful morning for it," he commented, surveying the landscape. "They'll have good weather for their journey." Behind him came Mike Townsend and Tommy Sullivan, followed by Tommy's daughter Emily, whose auburn braids bounced with barely contained excitement. At 12, she had appointed herself unofficial assistant to the project, absorbing information about wolf behavior with a voracity that impressed even Kara. "Are they here?" Emily asked breathlessly, then spotted the wolves and fell silent, her expression transforming to one of reverence. The gathering on Warren's porch had an air of ceremony about it, each person acutely aware of the significance of the day. After months of recovery, monitoring, and careful preparation, Shadow and Echo were ready to return fully to the wild. The tracking collars they now wore, lightweight, unobtrusive devices that replaced the malfunctioning ones they'd lost during the winter, would allow Kara to monitor their movements without human interference. "The satellite imagery confirms what we suspected," Kara told the assembled group, her professional tone barely masking her own emotional investment. "Their original pack has established territory about 40 miles northeast of here. The GPS tracking shows they're stable, 9 members, including the alpha pair and this year's pups." "Will they be accepted back?" Emily asked, her young face pinched with concern. Harper smiled gently. "Wolves have complex social structures, but they also recognize their own. These two are blood relatives to that pack. There's a good chance they'll be welcomed, especially now that they're healthy and strong." Tommy cleared his throat awkwardly. "And you're sure they won't circle back this way? Toward the ranches?" Kara's expression remained neutral, though Warren knew she still harbored some frustration with the rancher's lingering suspicion. "The collar data will alert us if they approach settled areas," she assured him. "But their natural instinct will be to rejoin their pack and hunt wild game in their established territory." Tommy nodded, seemingly satisfied. His daughter slipped her hand into his, and the gesture appeared to settle him further. Warren had observed over these months how the wolves had become a bridge between father and daughter, healing wounds left by the tragic loss of Tommy's older child. "It's time," Kara said finally, checking her watch. "We should head out if we want to reach the release point by noon." The plan was methodical, developed through weeks of consultation between Kara, Dr. Harper, and wildlife management experts. They would transport the wolves to the eastern edge of their pack's territory, release them in an area with plentiful game, and withdraw immediately to minimize human scent and presence. Loading the wolves into the specially designed transport crates proved easier than anticipated. Kara had spent weeks acclimatizing them to the crates, placing their food inside, gradually closing the doors for increasing periods. Now, with only minimal coaxing, Shadow and Echo entered the crates that would carry them to their new beginning. The small caravan, Warren's truck with the wolf crates secured in the bed, followed by Kara's research vehicle and Mike's official fish and wildlife truck, wound slowly along the mountain roads. Tommy had elected to stay behind with Emily, promising to help prepare for the small gathering Warren had reluctantly agreed to host after the release. As they drove, Warren found himself sinking into memory. The desperate wolves at his door that winter night, the struggle to save the female and the profound grief when they failed, the unexpected alliance with Tommy Sullivan after years of mutual avoidance, Kara's passion for her work, which had evolved from pure research to a deeper commitment to conservation. His own journey from isolation to connection. "Any for your thoughts," Kara said beside him, breaking the long silence. Warren glanced at her, then back at the road. "Just thinking about how much has changed, how much they change things." He didn't need to specify who they were. Kara nodded, understanding. "Nature has a way of shaking up our carefully constructed worlds, especially when we think we've got it all figured out." The relief site was a secluded meadow bordered by dense forest, a natural corridor that wildlife used to move between valleys. Warren parked at the designated spot, and the small team moved with practiced efficiency. The crates were unloaded and positioned facing the forest edge, their doors aligned for simultaneous opening. "Last readings look good," Kara reported, checking the collar signals on her tablet. "Heart rate's elevated, but within normal parameters for the situation." Dr. Harper performed a final visual check through the crate ventilation holes. "They're alert, focused on the forest. Good signs." Warren stood a few paces back, his chest tight with conflicting emotions. Part of him, a larger part than he cared to admit, wanted to cancel the whole operation, to take the wolves back to his cabin where he could continue to watch over them. But he knew that impulse was selfish. These were wild creatures who belonged with their kind, living the lives nature had designed them for. "Whenever you're ready, Warren," Kara said gently. They had all agreed he should be the one to open the crates, a symbolic completion of the circle that had begun on his porch that winter night. Warren approached slowly, aware of the wolves' keen eyes tracking his movement. For a moment he crouched between the crates, one hand on each door latch. "Be well out there," he murmured, too softly for the others to hear. Then, with a deep breath, he simultaneously lifted both latches and stepped quickly back. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. The crate doors stood open, but the wolves remained inside as if uncertain of this new development. Then Shadow made the first move, emerging cautiously, his nose working overtime to process the new location. Echo followed a moment later, pressing close to his brother's flank. The wolves paused, surveying their surroundings. They sniffed the air, ears swiveling to catch every sound. Shadow's gaze swept across the humans standing motionless several yards away, lingering momentarily on Warren. There was no sentimentality in that wild amber stare, no human emotion that Warren could project onto it, just the clear, unfiltered assessment of a predator evaluating potential threat or benefit. Then Shadow turned toward the forest, Echo still at his side. With no further acknowledgment of the humans who had saved them, they trotted into the trees, their forms quickly swallowed by the dappled shadows of the Alaskan wilderness. "They're gone," Mike said, unnecessarily breaking the profound silence that had fallen over the group. Kara consulted her tablet. "Collars functioning perfectly. They're moving steadily northeast, exactly as we hoped." She glanced up at Warren, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine empathy. "They're going to be fine." Warren nodded, not trusting his voice. The rational part of him knew this was the right outcome, the only acceptable outcome for wild animals. Yet he couldn't deny the hollow feeling expanding in his chest, the sense of loss that seemed disproportionate to the brief time the wolves had been in his life. The drive back to the cabin was quieter, each person lost in their own reflections. When they arrived, they found Tommy and Emily had been busy. A hand-painted banner reading "Good luck, wolves," hung from the porch railing, and a modest spread of food and drinks awaited them on the picnic table Warren had built the previous month. As the small group gathered to share the meal, conversation gradually shifted from the wolves to broader topics: the coming summer fishing season, Emily's science project on local wildlife, Dr. Harper's plans to train a new veterinary assistant, life continuing as it always did. Late in the afternoon, as the gathering began to disperse, Kara pulled Warren aside. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," she said, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in her voice. Warren raised an eyebrow, waiting. The university has approved funding for a permanent research station in this area, she explained. Nothing elaborate, just a small facility where we can continue monitoring not just Shadow and Echo, but the entire ecosystem they're part of. That's good news, Warren offered, not sure why she seemed hesitant. Kara took a deep breath. We need someone local, someone who knows these woods, to help maintain the station. It would be part-time work, mostly during the summer months. She met his eyes directly. I thought of you. The offer caught Warren off guard. Me? I'm not a scientist. I don't know the first thing about your research. You know these mountains better than anyone. You understand the rhythms of the seasons, the wildlife patterns. Kara smiled. And you've proven you can work with difficult team members, human or otherwise. Warren glanced around his property. The cabin he'd built with Sarah, the gardens they'd planted together, the workshop where he'd spent countless solitary hours. For years this place had been both haven and prison, sheltering him from a world that felt too sharp, too painful after his loss. The wolves had changed that, forcing open doors he'd believed permanently closed. Through them he'd reconnected not just with the natural world, but with the human community he'd withdrawn from. The prospect of continuing that connection, of finding new purpose in work that mattered, was unexpectedly appealing. I'll think about it, he promised. Later that evening, after everyone had gone and the cabin had returned to its accustomed quiet, Warren sat on his porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The lengthening shadows reminded him of the wolf who had carried that name, now miles away in the wilderness where he belonged. A notification chimed on the tablet Kara had left with him. Warren picked it up, navigating to the tracking program as she had shown him. 2 blinking dots represented Shadow and Echo, moving steadily through the forest, their path a straight line toward their ancestral pack. Warren smiled, imagining their journey, 2 brothers traveling together through the twilight, guided by instincts and senses humans could barely comprehend. They had survived against tremendous odds, found help in the most unlikely place, and were now returning to the wild with strength and wisdom earned through hardship. As darkness settled over the mountains, Warren thought he heard a distant howl. Too far away to be Shadow or Echo, perhaps a member of their waiting pack calling into the night. The sound brought no fear now, only a deep appreciation for the complex, beautiful world that existed beyond human boundaries. Tomorrow he would call Kara and accept her offer. Tomorrow he would begin preparing his garden for summer planting, larger this year with new varieties he hadn't bothered with when cooking only for himself. Tomorrow he would continue the journey that had begun with 2 desperate wolves on his doorstep, a journey back to life after years of merely surviving. But tonight he simply sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the voice of the wilderness, a voice that had always been there, waiting patiently for him to remember how to hear it. In the quietude of life's winter seasons, we sometimes find our most profound connections in unexpected places. Warren's journey reminds us that even after profound loss, when we've built walls around our hearts thinking they'll protect us, life finds a way to reach through. Those wolves, desperate, wild, and yet somehow knowing, chose his door not by accident, but because some souls recognize each other across the boundaries of species. For many of us who've weathered our own storms, who've lost loved ones and retreated into the familiar comfort of solitude, Warren's story resonates deeply. It tells us it's never too late to open our doors again, to risk caring, to find new purpose in protecting something beyond ourselves. The wilderness we fear often contains the very medicine we need. Like Warren, you too might discover that in helping others heal, be they people, animals, or communities, you mend pieces of yourself you thought permanently broken. Your wisdom, your experience, your capacity for compassion, these are gifts still waiting to be shared, if only you'll answer when life comes knocking. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.